Welcome back to 15-Minute Discourse. Today we're diving into something pretty wild, remote viewing. So basically the idea is that you can see stuff, perceive stuff without actually using your senses, just with your mind.
Like ESP, like a psychic power.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The U.S. government, they took this seriously, like really seriously.
Really?
Yeah, they poured millions of dollars into researching this, especially during the Cold War.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
It's pretty wild. We've got declassified government documents, we've got research papers, historical accounts, all about this top-secret program called Project Stargate.
Okay, so this is real then.
I mean, the research is real. Whether the remote viewing itself is real, that's what we're going to try to figure out in this deep dive.
I'm intrigued.
So, to understand why the government was so interested in this, we need to go back to the Cold War. Intense paranoia, the U.S. and the Soviet Union constantly trying to one-up each other. The U.S. was worried, like really worried, that the Soviets were developing what they called psychotronic warfare capabilities.
Psychotronic warfare. That sounds intense.
Yeah, basically using psychic powers, maybe for espionage or even like psychic attacks. Sounds crazy, right?
Kind of, but also kind of awesome.
I know, right? So the U.S., they felt like they had to investigate this.
Yeah, you got to know what the other side's up to.
Exactly. See if they could harness these abilities, for their own purposes.
Makes sense. So how do they even, go about researching this? It's not like you can just, put psychic powers in a test tube.
Well, that's where Project Stargate comes in. This was their top-secret program, all dedicated to investigating psychic phenomena, specifically remote viewing, for potential military and intelligence applications.
Wow, so this wasn't just some small-scale thing.
Oh, no. We're talking CIA, DIA, Army's Intelligence and Security Command, all involved in this clandestine operation.
That's a lot of acronyms.
It's a whole world of, spy thriller stuff. So Project Stargate was actually an umbrella term. There were all these sub-projects, each with its own code name, its own specific focus.
Okay, so, what were we talking about?
Well, there was Scannet, that was run by the CIA. Then you had Sunstreak, Grill Flame, and Center Lane, and those were under the DIA and INSCOM. And you know what's crazy? These programs, they were kept completely secret for years and years.
So no transparency whatsoever.
Not at all.
Right.
Which, of course, raises all sorts of questions, like how much can we really trust the research?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's hard to, verify things when everything's shrouded in secrecy.
Exactly. So let's unpack this a bit. How do they actually try to test remote viewing? Who were the big names involved?
Good questions.
One of the major players was the Stanford Research Institute, SRI.
Stanford, huh?
Yeah. In the 1970s, physicists Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff, they were conducting some pretty groundbreaking experiments there, funded by, you guessed it, the CIA.
The CIA funding psychic research. This just keeps getting weirder and weirder.
I know, right? So they wanted to see if people could describe remote locations using only their minds. They called this technique coordinate remote viewing.
Coordinate remote viewing. So, how'd that work? Did they, blindfold people and say, okay, describe what's in the next room?
Well, not exactly. It was more like they'd give the participant, the viewer, geographical coordinates, and the viewer would try to see what was at those coordinates, give descriptions, sketches, even just mental impressions.
Wow, trying to tap into some kind of sixth sense. So was anyone checking on these experiments, making sure things were legit? I mean, there had to be some skeptics out there, right?
Oh, absolutely. The American Institutes for Research, they're called AIR, they did independent evaluations of Project Stargate. Their findings, though, it's a mixed bag.
Mixed bag, how so?
They acknowledged there were some interesting results, especially in those early SRI experiments, but they also pointed out methodological flaws, like maybe there wasn't enough control for sensory leakage or experimenter bias, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, with something like this, you have to be super careful about controlling the experiment.
Exactly. Plus, the AIR, they said there was a lack of consistent results. They weren't really getting actionable intelligence from remote viewing.
Yeah, if this was going to be a real intelligence tool, it would have to be pretty reliable, right?
Exactly. And this is where the big debate comes in. The proponents, they believe in remote viewing, and they've got their arguments and their evidence. The skeptics, they're not convinced, and they've got their counter-arguments. It's a real back and forth.
I bet. So what do the proponents say?
Well, they point to the anecdotal accounts, people claiming to have experienced or witnessed successful remote viewing, especially those involved in these government programs. They say, look, these people are credible, they wouldn't lie.
Okay, that's something. What else?
And then they point to those early experiments at SRI, the ones that seem to show statistically significant results, above chance. They say see, there's something real here.
Interesting.
And of course, their big argument is, why would the government fund this research for over 2 decades if there wasn't something to it?
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. The government doesn't usually throw money at things for no reason.
Right. So they're saying, look, the government was convinced enough to invest all this time and money. That has to mean something.
And what about those skeptics? What do they say?
Well, they come back swinging, you know?
Yeah.
They say, hold on, those anecdotal accounts, they're just stories. People can be mistaken. They can be influenced by what they want to believe. There's bias. You can't just take them at face value.
Sure.
And about those early experiments, they point out the methodological flaws, say maybe the controls weren't tight enough, maybe there was unintentional cues being given, and that could have skewed the results.
Right. And they probably have a response to the government funding argument, too.
Oh, absolutely. They're like, just because the government funded it doesn't mean it's automatically valid, right? And they point out that eventually the government did shut down these programs.
So they're saying if it was really working, they wouldn't have done that.
Exactly. So it's this fascinating tension, between those intriguing possibilities and the need for, like, really solid scientific evidence. We're left with more questions than answers.
This is getting really interesting.
I know. And we haven't even gotten to the part about Science Applications International Corporation, or SAIC. That's where the research shifted in 1988 under Edwin May.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So at SAIC, they were really trying to up the scientific game. They wanted to standardize the protocols, bring more rigor to the whole field.
So, like, they wanted to address some of those methodological concerns the skeptics were bringing up?
Exactly. And they were also looking at different applications for remote viewing. Not just espionage, but things like medical diagnosis, finding missing persons, really pushing the boundaries.
That's pretty wild. So did they make any big breakthroughs? Did they find any, like, undeniable proof of remote viewing?
Well, according to the sources we've got, it doesn't seem like there were any earth-shattering discoveries during that period, but they did contribute a lot to the research. They refined the methodologies, collected a lot of data.
I see. So more like building on what was already there, trying to make it more, well, more scientific.
Yeah, exactly. And, even though they were trying to bridge the gap between the anecdotes and the need for hard proof, the scientific community still remained divided. Some were swayed, others weren't. The debate continues to this day.
That's fascinating. So even with all this research, we're still left with this big question mark hanging over remote viewing.
Exactly. But you know what? Even if we can't say for sure whether it's real or not, the whole idea of remote viewing, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. It raises all sorts of questions about the nature of consciousness, about how we perceive the world, about what's even possible.
Exactly. It's like, if our minds can do this, what else are they capable of? What are we missing,
I'm ready to keep digging. What else have you got?
Even if we set aside the skeptics for a second, even if we say, okay, maybe there's something to this remote viewing thing, there's still a ton of challenges and limitations.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, one of the biggest ones is consistency.
Right.
Can you get reliable results?
Right. If you're trying to use this for, I don't know, like intelligence gathering, you need to know it's going to work.
Yeah. Exactly. And the research, it shows that it's not always so reliable. The AR evaluations, remember, they pointed that out.
Yeah, I remember they were like, the results aren't consistent enough to be really useful for intelligence.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of, like, the information itself. What are you actually getting from remote viewing?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
It's often really vague, really ambiguous. The viewer might give you a description or a sketch, but it's hard to know what it really means,
Yeah, like, is it a genuine insight? Or is it just a random guess? Or maybe the viewer's projecting their own thoughts and ideas onto the target.
Exactly. It's hard to tell the difference sometimes, and that makes it tough to use this information for anything practical.
I see what you mean. It's like you could get a vision of something, but how do you know if it's real or just, your imagination running wild?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's something called analytic overlay, and this is where it gets even trickier.
Analytic overlay, what's that?
It's basically the idea that the viewer, they can be influenced by their own prior knowledge, their expectations, or even the questions they're being asked.
So, like, they might see what they expect to see or what they think the experimenter wants them to see.
Exactly. It's unintentional, of course, but it can really skew the results. It's like, how do you separate what's genuine remote viewing from what's just the viewer's own thoughts and biases?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It seems like there are so many potential pitfalls with this kind of research.
Exactly. And that's why, even if we say, okay, maybe there's something to remote viewing, We still have to be super cautious, super critical.
Makes sense. You can't just jump to conclusions, right? You need to carefully evaluate the evidence, consider all the possible explanations.
Exactly. And, even some of the proponents of remote viewing, they acknowledge these challenges. They know it's not a perfect science. They know there are limitations.
So it's not like they're just ignoring the problems.
No, not at all. They're trying to address them, trying to refine the methodologies, trying to figure out how to make remote viewing more reliable, more accurate.
So it's a work in progress then.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a work in progress. But you know what? Even with all these challenges, even with the lack of definitive proof, the whole idea of remote viewing, it's still fascinating, isn't it?
Totally. It just kind of blows your mind, like what if our minds can really do this? What if we can really see things beyond our normal senses?
I know, right? Makes you wonder what else might be possible. What other mysteries are out there waiting to be uncovered?
Exactly. And it's not just about the science, it's about the history, the culture, all the stories and beliefs that surround this idea of seeing beyond the ordinary.
You're right. We were talking about Project Stargate, but this idea of remote viewing or clairvoyance, it's been around for centuries. Think about the oracles in ancient Greece or the
Hmm.
seers and prophets in different cultures. It's like this universal human fascination with the unknown.
Yeah, like in every culture, there's this idea that maybe some people can tap into knowledge or information that's hidden from the rest of us.
It's like this deep-seated belief that there's more to reality than what we can see and hear and touch. And maybe, just maybe, some people have a way to access that hidden reality.
And even today, you have people who claim to be clairvoyant, people who practice things like astral projection.
Astral projection, that's like leaving your body and traveling to different places, right?
Yeah, it's often described as a kind of out-of-body experience, a way to see things remotely.
It's like remote viewing taken to the next level. It's like if you can see things with your mind, maybe you can even travel there with your mind.
Right. It's a pretty wild concept.
It is. And,
Yeah.
all of this, the research, the history, the personal experiences, it all points to this fundamental question. Can consciousness really extend beyond the limits of our physical bodies?
It's like we're trying to grapple with the very nature of consciousness itself. What is it? Where does it reside? What are its limits?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling stuff. And, even if we can't answer those questions definitively, the exploration itself is worthwhile. It makes us think. It challenges our assumptions. It opens up new possibilities.
It's like we're on this amazing journey of discovery and we don't even know where it's going to lead. But it's exciting.
It is. And, we haven't even touched on the ethical implications of all this. Like, what if someone could really see into other people's minds without their consent? That's a whole other can of worms, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We have to think about the potential for misuse, the potential for harm.
Hmm.
If remote viewing is real, we need to figure out how to use it responsibly, ethically.
Exactly. It's like with any powerful technology or ability, there's always the potential for good and for bad. We have to think about the consequences.
I agree. And, it's not just up to the scientists to figure this out. It's a conversation that needs to involve everyone. Ethicists, policymakers, the public. We all have a stake in this.
We've gone from Cold War espionage to the depths of human consciousness and back again. So where do we even begin to sum all this up?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway, for me at least, is that remote viewing, it's still a mystery.
Yeah, after all this research, all these debates, we still don't have a definitive answer.
Exactly. We've got these intriguing anecdotes, people claiming to have these amazing abilities, and we've got some suggestive experimental results, but nothing conclusive, nothing that really convinces the entire scientific community.
Right, we've talked about all those challenges with the research, like the consistency problem, the ambiguity of the information, the possibility of bias.
Yeah, all those things make it really hard to say for sure whether remote viewing is a real phenomenon or not.
It's like we're missing some crucial piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. But you know what? Even with all the uncertainty, I think the exploration itself has been valuable.
I agree. It's made us think about things in a new way, question our assumptions about what's possible.
Exactly. And, science isn't always about finding definitive answers. Sometimes it's about asking the right questions, exploring the unknown, pushing the boundaries of our understanding.
Right. And remote viewing definitely pushes those boundaries. It makes you wonder, what else are we missing? What other mysteries are out there waiting to be discovered?
It's a good reminder that we don't know everything, that there's still so much to learn about the world and about ourselves.
And, one thing we haven't really talked about is the ethical side of this.
Oh, yeah, the ethics are huge.
Like any powerful technology, right?
Exactly. It can be used for good or for bad. So if remote viewing is real, we need to be thinking about those ethical implications right now.
Yeah, we need to figure out how to use this responsibly, how to protect people from harm.
It's not just a scientific issue, it's a societal issue.
Well said.
Okay.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big question we're left with is, what do we do with this information? How do we move forward?
It's a tough question. I don't think there are any easy answers, but I think the first step is to keep the conversation going.
Keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep challenging our assumptions.
Exactly. And to do it all ethically, thoughtfully, with a sense of responsibility.
Well said. So to all our listeners out there, keep those minds curious and keep those imaginations open. Who knows what other mysteries are out there waiting to be discovered? And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more explorations into the unknown.